Sarah Thompson's hands trembled as she read the text message for the third time, the words blurring through her tears. "You won't be joining us. Victoria prefers to keep it just family." The smell of the coffee she'd been drinking turned bitter in her mouth, and she felt her chest tighten, with a pain that had nothing to do with her heart medication. 3 days before the cruise, she had paid for her son, was uninviting her from her own family vacation. At 62, Sarah Thompson had built a $3 million real estate empire from nothing after her husband's death. But her greatest pride had always been her son Jason. She kept his childhood baseball trophy on her kitchen windowsill, polishing it weekly, a ritual that reminded her of Saturday mornings when being his mother was the most important job in the world. This is the story of how a mother's love was weaponized against her, how financial manipulation masqueraded as family affection, and how one woman's courage to say enough would expose a conspiracy that had been years in the making. Because sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones stealing your future. But to understand how Sarah became the target of her own family's greed, we need to go back to the moment when her generosity crossed the line from love into enabling. Sarah's colonial-style home in Oak Ridge, Connecticut, sat on a quiet tree-lined street where the scent of autumn leaves mixed with the distant aroma of wood smoke from neighborhood fireplaces. The house itself was a testament to Sarah's business acumen. She had purchased it as a foreclosure 20 years earlier, and the sound of her heels on the restored hardwood floors still gave her satisfaction. Her home office smelled of leather and vanilla candles, the walls lined with framed photographs of successful property renovations, and a single picture of 8-year-old Jason in his Little League uniform. The morning light streaming through the bay windows illuminated dust motes that danced like tiny reminders of all the dreams she had built in this space. But lately, the house felt different. The silence was heavier, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of settling wood sounds that had once been comforting but now seemed to echo with loneliness. Jason Thompson sat in his Fairfield County home, staring at his phone after sending the text message that would change everything. At 34, he had never learned to balance his mother's overwhelming generosity with his wife's relentless demands, and the constant pressure was destroying him from the inside. "Did you send it?" Victoria asked from the kitchen, her voice carrying the edge that had become constant in their marriage. "Yeah, I sent it," Jason replied, but his stomach churned with guilt. He remembered being 12 years old, sitting in this same position while his mother worked late into the night, building the business that would eventually pay for everything he had ever wanted. Jason's hands shook as he set down his phone. He loved his mother, had always loved her, but Victoria's constant complaints about Sarah's interference and control had worn him down. "She's suffocating us," Victoria would say. "She uses her money to manipulate us, to keep us dependent." But deep down, Jason knew the truth was more complicated. His mother had never asked for anything in return, for her generosity never made demands or set conditions. The manipulation Victoria described existed mainly in Victoria's imagination, fueled by her own insecurities and greed. Victoria Martinez Thompson had grown up in a household where love was conditional and resources were scarce. Her father had left when she was 10, and her mother had struggled to raise 3 children on a waitress's salary. Victoria had learned early that security was fragile and that you had to fight for every advantage. When she married Jason, she thought she was marrying into stability. But Jason's business failures and his mother's obvious wealth had created a toxic combination of envy and entitlement in Victoria's mind. She saw Sarah's generosity not as kindness, but as a reminder of her own family's poverty. "She flaunts her money," Victoria would tell her sister during their weekly phone calls. "She acts like she's so generous, but she's really just showing off. And Jason is too weak to see it." Victoria's plan to gain control of Sarah's finances wasn't just about money. It was about proving that she was smart enough, strong enough to take what she believed her family deserved. The baseball trophy sat on Sarah's kitchen windowsill, catching the morning light like a beacon of better times. Jason had won it when he was 8, the year after his father died, and Sarah had made it to every game, despite working 2 jobs and attending night school. The trophy was brass-plated plastic, worth maybe $5, but Sarah had polished it every Saturday morning for 26 years. She touched it now, feeling the familiar weight in her hands, remembering Jason's face when he'd run to her after the game, his uniform dirty and his smile radiant with pride. "Mom, did you see me hit the ball?" The cruise that Sarah had planned as a family celebration would become the moment when the mask finally slipped, revealing the true nature of her son and daughter-in-law's intentions. Sarah sat in her kitchen, the text message still glowing on her phone screen, and felt her world tilting off its axis. The rational part of her mind tried to find explanations. Maybe Victoria was feeling overwhelmed. Maybe they needed couple time. Maybe she was being too sensitive. But her heart knew better. She had raised Jason, had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities she'd never had. She had worked 16-hour days to pay for his college, had celebrated every achievement, had been there for every failure. How could he exclude her so casually, so cruelly? Sarah's hands found the baseball trophy, and she held it against her chest like a talisman. The metal was cool against her palm, and she could smell the faint scent of the brass polish she used every week. "Maybe I'm overreacting," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "Maybe this is normal. Maybe I'm being too clingy." But even as she tried to rationalize Jason's behavior, a small voice in her head, the same voice that had guided her through decades of successful business decisions, whispered that something was very wrong. The voice reminded her of other recent incidents, the way Victoria had started answering Jason's phone when Sarah called, the way family dinners had become increasingly rare, the way Jason's eyes had stopped meeting hers when he asked for money. Sarah's first instinct was to call her friend Eleanor, but Eleanor was visiting her own son in Boston, dealing with her own family crisis. Instead, Sarah found herself thinking about Margaret Chen, another woman in her investment group who had been struggling with similar issues. Margaret was 67, a retired teacher whose daughter Linda had been gradually taking control of her finances under the guise of helping with paperwork. Margaret had mentioned during their last meeting that Linda had been pressuring her to sell her house and move into a senior living facility. "I know Linda means well," Margaret had said, her voice uncertain. "She says I'm getting too old to manage such a big house. And she's probably right. I do get confused sometimes about the bills." Sarah had wanted to speak up then, to tell Margaret that being occasionally confused about bills didn't mean she needed to give up her independence. But she had stayed silent, not wanting to interfere in someone else's family business. Now reading Jason's text message, Sarah wondered if she had been watching Margaret's future unfold, and if Margaret's passive acceptance of her daughter's control was a preview of what would happen to her if she didn't stand up for herself. Sarah's investigation began with the smell of fear, that metallic taste in her mouth, as she opened her laptop and logged into her banking website. The computer screen cast a blue glow across her face as she scrolled through months of transactions, her heart rate increasing with each unauthorized transfer she discovered. The bank statements rustled in her hands as she spread them across her dining room table, the paper feeling thin and insubstantial compared to the weight of betrayal they represented. Victoria had been taking money for over a year. $1, $200. Here, $800. Their amount small enough to avoid automatic alerts, but large enough to total $23,000. Sarah's hands trembled as she found the power of attorney documents hidden in a folder marked tax information. The paper smelled like Victoria's perfume, that cloying floral scent that had always made Sarah feel slightly nauseous. The documents were partially completed, waiting for Sarah's signature, and as she read them, she felt her chest tighten with the realization of how close she had come to signing away her entire financial future. The worst discovery was a folder of nursing home brochures that Victoria had collected, complete with pricing information and notes about memory care options. The glossy paper felt cold in Sarah's hands, and she could taste bile rising in her throat as she understood the full scope of Victoria's plan. Sarah's discovery of the financial manipulation was just the beginning. What she would uncover next would reveal a conspiracy that had been months in the making. Sarah's investigation revealed the depth of Jason and Victoria's betrayal, but it also triggered a crisis of maternal instinct that nearly paralyzed her. She would spend hours staring at the evidence, then find herself making excuses for Jason's behavior. Maybe he didn't know, she told herself, picking up the baseball trophy and turning it over in her hands. Maybe Victoria was doing this without his knowledge. Maybe I should give him a chance to explain. Sarah would reach for her phone to call Jason, then stop herself, remembering the cold tone of his text message. She would draft emails explaining what she had discovered, then delete them without sending. The internal war between her love for her son and her need for self-protection was exhausting. One evening, Sarah found herself in Jason's old bedroom, which she had kept exactly as he had left it when he moved out. The room smelled like the cologne he had worn in high school, and his old posters still hung on the walls. She sat on his bed, holding a photo of the two of them from his college graduation, and felt her resolve crumbling. "He's my son," she whispered to the empty room. "He's all I have left of David. How can I fight against my own child?" But then she remembered the nursing home brochures, the cold calculation of Victoria's research, and the casual cruelty of being excluded from the family cruise. Sarah realized that the son she was trying to protect no longer existed. He had been replaced by a man who was willing to steal from her and plan her institutionalization. Jason's internal conflict was tearing him apart, but he felt trapped between his mother's expectations and his wife's demands. He sat in his car outside Sarah's house for 20 minutes, unable to bring himself to go inside and face her after sending the cruise text. His phone buzzed with another message from Victoria. "Did you tell her yet? We need to get those power of attorney papers signed before we leave." Jason's hands shook as he typed back, "I can't do this anymore. This is my mother we're talking about." Victoria's response was immediate and harsh. "Your mother has been controlling you your entire life. It's time to grow up and think about our family's future." But Jason remembered sitting in this same driveway 20 years ago, crying after his father's funeral, while his mother worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. He remembered her missing her own social events to attend his school, plays her pride when he graduated from college, her unconditional support through his business failures. She never asked for anything in return. Jason whispered to himself, "She just loved me." But Victoria's voice was louder than his conscience, and Jason's fear of conflict was stronger than his love for his mother. While Sarah struggled with her own family crisis, Margaret Chen was facing the final stages of her daughter Linda's financial takeover. Margaret had signed the power of attorney documents 3 weeks earlier, believing Linda's assurances that it was just for emergencies. Now Margaret sat in her living room, while Linda and her husband went through her belongings, deciding what to keep and what to sell before the move to Sunset Manor. "Mom, you don't need all these books," Linda said, boxing up Margaret's library. "The facility has a library, and you probably won't be doing much reading anyway." Margaret watched her life being packed away and felt a deep sadness that she couldn't articulate. She had taught English for 40 years, had loved literature and learning. But Linda was right, she probably wouldn't be doing much reading in the memory care unit. "I should have said no," Margaret thought to herself. "I should have fought harder." But it was too late now. The house was sold, the papers were signed, and Margaret had learned too late that protecting yourself from family manipulation required a strength she had never developed. As Jason and Victoria enjoyed their cruise, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would use their absence to take decisive action to protect herself and expose their manipulation. But the decision was harder than she had imagined. Sarah sat in her home office, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, and felt the weight of ending her relationship with Jason forever. She picked up the baseball trophy and held it against her chest, remembering every Saturday morning when she had polished it while Jason ate breakfast and told her about his dreams. "If I do this, there's no going back," she whispered to the empty room. "I'll lose him forever." But then she thought about Margaret Chen, now living in a sterile facility, while her daughter enjoyed Margaret's house and savings. She thought about the nursing home brochures, the power of attorney documents, and the casual cruelty of being excluded from her own family. Sarah realized that she had already lost Jason. The question was whether she would lose herself too. "I can't save him," she said aloud, her voice growing stronger. "But I can save myself." While Jason and Victoria sailed through the Caribbean on Sarah's money, she was preparing a surprise that would expose their conspiracy and protect her from their greed. Sarah's darkest moment came not when she discovered the theft, but when she realized she had to choose between protecting herself and maintaining the illusion of family love. She sat in her kitchen at 3 a.m., the baseball trophy in her hands, and felt the weight of a decision that would define the rest of her life. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain against the windows. Sarah could smell the lingering scent of the dinner she had cooked for herself, a meal that had grown cold while she stared at bank statements and legal documents. "Maybe I'm being too harsh," she whispered to the darkness. "Maybe there's another way." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria, sent from the cruise ship. "Having such a wonderful family time. Wish you were here." The casual cruelty of the message, sent while they enjoyed the vacation Sarah had paid for, crystallized her resolve. But even as she felt her anger building, Sarah's maternal instincts fought against her need for self-protection. She walked to Jason's old bedroom and stood in the doorway, remembering bedtime stories and homework help, scraped knees, and broken hearts. The room smelled like childhood, that mixture of soap and dreams that had once been her whole world. "He's still my son," she said aloud, her voice breaking. "No matter what he's done, he's still my son." But Sarah also remembered Margaret Chen's defeated expression as she was moved to the nursing home, and she understood that love without boundaries was not love at all, it was enabling. Sarah's preparation for the confrontation was meticulous, but it was also an act of mourning. She was preparing to lose her son, and every step of the process felt like a small death. Working with her attorney Michael Harrison and private investigator Robert Davis, Sarah documented every aspect of Jason and Victoria's betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming: unauthorized financial transfers, forged documents, planned institutionalization, and a systematic campaign to isolate her from her own life. "Mrs. Thompson, what they've done is not just unethical, it's criminal," Michael explained. "You have grounds for both civil and criminal prosecution." But Sarah's focus wasn't on punishment, it was on protection. She changed all her passwords, froze the compromised accounts, and began the process of selling the house she had bought for Jason and Victoria. The hardest part was packing away Jason's childhood belongings. Sarah found herself holding each item: his first-grade art projects, his high school yearbooks, his college acceptance letters, and saying goodbye to the son she had raised and loved. She placed the baseball trophy in a box with the other mementos, then stopped herself. Some symbols were too important to pack away. She returned the trophy to its place on the windowsill, but now it represented not just happy memories, but also the mother she had been and the woman she was becoming. Sarah's moment of truth came when Jason called from the cruise ship, his voice slurred with alcohol and guilt. "Mom, I've been thinking about what we did, about the cruise. Maybe we were too harsh." Sarah's heart leapt at the sound of his voice, and for a moment, she almost forgot about the theft, the manipulation, the planned institutionalization. This was her son calling to apologize, and every maternal instinct screamed at her to forgive and forget. "Jason, I'm glad you called," she said, her voice soft with hope. "We need to talk when you get back." "Yeah, we do," Jason replied. "Victoria thinks I'm being weak, but I miss you, Mom. I miss us." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she heard the pain in Jason's voice. This was the son she remembered, the boy who had once told her she was his best friend. Maybe there was hope. Maybe they could work through this. But then Jason's voice changed, becoming calculating and manipulative. "Mom, when we get back, we really need to get those financial documents sorted out. Victoria says it's important for tax purposes." The spell was broken. Even in his moment of apparent remorse, Jason was still trying to manipulate her into signing away her financial independence. Sarah realized that his call wasn't about love or family. It was about making sure she would still be compliant when they returned. "Jason will talk when you get back," Sarah said quietly, and hung up the phone. Sarah's conversation with Jason from the cruise ship would be their last as mother and son. What happened next would expose the true nature of their relationship and force everyone to face the consequences of their choices. The confrontation took place in Sarah's living room, with Eleanor present as a witness and Michael Harrison participating by phone. The room smelled like the vanilla candles Sarah had lit to calm her nerves, but the familiar scent did nothing to ease the tension that filled the air like electricity before a storm. Jason and Victoria arrived in a state of fury and disbelief, having discovered strangers moving into the house they had considered their own. Jason's face was sunburned from the cruise, and Victoria's designer clothes seemed incongruous with the rage contorting her features. "Mom, what the hell have you done?" Jason demanded, his voice carrying a desperation that Sarah had never heard before. "There are people moving into our house. They say they bought it from you." Sarah looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw not the child she had raised with love and sacrifice, but a man who had been willing to steal her life savings and have her committed to a nursing home. The realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. "Jason, it was never your house," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "It was my house, purchased with my money as a gift to you, and I've decided to revoke that gift." Victoria's face was twisted with rage, and Sarah could smell her perfume, that cloying floral scent that now made her feel nauseous. "You can't do this. We've been living there for months. We've made improvements. We've established residency. With money you stole from my accounts," Sarah replied, placing the folder of evidence on the coffee table. The papers rustled as she opened it, and Sarah could feel the weight of every document, every proof of betrayal. Jason's face went white as he saw the bank statements, the power of attorney documents, the nursing home brochures. "Mom, I can explain." "Jason, there's nothing to explain," Sarah interrupted. "I have documentation of $23,000 in unauthorized transfers. I have the power of attorney papers you and Victoria prepared without my knowledge. I have evidence that you were planning to have me declared incompetent and placed in institutional care." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Jason's labored breathing and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Jason's composure cracked completely as the weight of his actions hit him. He sank into the chair where he had sat as a child listening to his mother read bedtime stories, and began to cry. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was scared, and Victoria kept saying that you were trying to control us, that we needed to protect ourselves." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she watched her son's tears, but she also noticed that he was still making excuses, still blaming Victoria for his own choices. "Jason, you're 34 years old," she said gently. "You made your own decisions. You chose to help Victoria steal from me. You chose to research nursing homes where you could have me committed. You chose to exclude me from the cruise I paid for." Jason looked up at her with eyes that reminded her of the 8-year-old boy who had won the baseball trophy. "I know, Mom. I know I chose wrong. I was so tired of feeling like a failure. Victoria made me feel like taking your money was somehow justified, like we deserved it, because I couldn't provide for us myself." Sarah felt a moment of wavering as she saw genuine remorse in Jason's eyes. This was the son she remembered, the boy who had once told her she was his hero. But then she remembered Margaret Chen, now living in a sterile facility, while her daughter enjoyed Margaret's house and savings. "Jason, I understand that you were struggling," Sarah said. "But understanding why you did something doesn't mean I have to accept the consequences of your choices." The final moment of Sarah's transformation came when Jason, in his desperation, reached for the baseball trophy on the windowsill. "Mom, remember when I won this? Remember how proud you were? Remember how we used to be?" Sarah watched her son hold the trophy, and she felt the full weight of everything they had lost. The trophy had been a symbol of their bond, of the Saturday mornings when being his mother was the most important job in the world. "I remember, Jason," she said softly. "I remember every game, every practice, every moment when you were proud to be my son. But I also remember the boy who won that trophy, the boy who was honest and kind and grateful for everything he had." Jason's hands trembled as he held the trophy, and Sarah could see him struggling between his love for her and his loyalty to Victoria. "Mom, I can be that boy again. I can change. We can start over." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she gently took the trophy from Jason's hands. The brass was cool against her palm, and she could smell the familiar scent of the polish she had used every Saturday morning for 26 years. "Jason, I love you," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I will always love the boy who won this trophy. But I can't let that love destroy me. I can't let you and Victoria steal my future, because I'm afraid of losing my past." She placed the trophy back on the windowsill, but now it represented not just happy memories, but also the boundaries she was setting between love and self-destruction. Victoria made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, her voice taking on the honey-sweet tone that had once fooled Sarah. "Sarah, you're making a terrible mistake. Without us, you'll be alone. Who's going to take care of you when you get older? Who's going to visit you, spend holidays with you?" Sarah could smell Victoria's desperation beneath the expensive perfume, and she felt a strange sense of pity for the woman who had tried so hard to destroy her. "Victoria, I'd rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who see me as a bank account with emotions," Sarah replied. "I've learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely, and being with family is not the same as being loved." Eleanor squeezed Sarah's hand supportively, and Sarah felt the warmth of genuine friendship, the kind of relationship that was based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. "I want you both to leave now," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "If you try to contact me again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. Our relationship is over." After Jason and Victoria left, Sarah sat in her living room, with Eleanor feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely peaceful. The house smelled like vanilla candles and the lingering scent of Victoria's perfume. But gradually the artificial floral smell faded, leaving only the comforting aroma of home. "Sarah, I'm proud of you," Eleanor said. "What you did took tremendous courage." Sarah picked up the baseball trophy and held it against her chest, feeling its familiar weight. "Eleanor, I finally understand that protecting myself isn't selfish. It's survival. I spent so many years trying to be the perfect mother that I forgot to be a complete person." Sarah's confrontation with Jason and Victoria was just the beginning of her journey toward independence and self-respect. The real transformation would come in the months that followed. Sarah's decision to protect herself from Jason and Victoria's financial abuse had immediate and far-reaching consequences. Within a week, she had sold the house, recovered most of the stolen money, and established new security measures to protect her assets. The story of Sarah's situation spread through Oak Ridge's social circles, sparking conversations about elder financial abuse and the vulnerability of wealthy individuals to exploitation by family members. Several of Sarah's friends revealed that they had experienced similar manipulation from adult children. And Sarah began to understand that her experience was not unique. Margaret Chen's situation had reached its inevitable conclusion. She was now living in Sunset Manor, while her daughter Linda enjoyed Margaret's house and savings. The contrast between Margaret's passive acceptance and Sarah's active resistance became a cautionary tale that spread throughout their community. Jason and Victoria's reputation in the community suffered permanent damage, and their financial desperation became public knowledge when they were forced to file for bankruptcy 6 months later. 1 year after her confrontation with Jason and Victoria, Sarah received a phone call that would define her new purpose. Dorothy Walsh, a 71-year-old widow from nearby Stamford, had heard about Sarah's story and was facing a similar situation with her daughter and son-in-law. "Mrs. Thompson, I don't know what to do," Dorothy said, her voice shaking. "My daughter has been taking money from my accounts, and she wants me to sign papers that I don't understand. I'm scared, but she's my daughter." Sarah drove to Stamford that afternoon, bringing with her the folder of evidence from her own case and the phone number of Michael Harrison, her attorney. She sat in Dorothy's kitchen, smelling the familiar scent of fear and desperation, and recognized the same confusion and self-doubt that had once paralyzed her. "Dorothy, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Sarah said, taking the older woman's hands in hers. "Your daughter's behavior is not normal, and it's not your fault. You have the right to protect yourself, and you have the power to stop this." Working together, Sarah and Dorothy documented the financial abuse, contacted attorneys, and successfully prevented Dorothy from losing her home and savings. Dorothy's daughter was forced to repay the stolen money and was legally prohibited from accessing her mother's accounts. Sarah's transformation from victim to survivor was complete. At 63, she had discovered that it was never too late to reclaim your power and protect your dignity. She had learned that family relationships must be based on mutual respect and love, not on financial obligation and emotional manipulation. The baseball trophy still sat on her windowsill, but now it represented not just happy memories, but also the strength she had found to protect herself. Sarah had learned to honor her past without being imprisoned by it, and to love her son without enabling his destructive behavior. Sarah's story proved that love without respect is not love at all, and that family relationships must be earned through behavior not assumed because of blood relations. Her journey showed that it's never too late to protect yourself from people who would exploit your generosity and kindness. 2 years after the confrontation with Jason and Victoria, Sarah Thompson stood in the garden of her new cottage in Mystic, Connecticut, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. At 64, she had built a life that was entirely her own, filled with genuine friendships, meaningful work, and the quiet satisfaction of helping others find their own strength. The cottage was smaller than her Oak Ridge home, but it was perfect for her needs. The baseball trophy sat on her kitchen windowsill, catching the morning light like a beacon of hard-won wisdom. She still polished it every Saturday morning. But now the ritual represented not just memories of the past, but also her commitment to honoring her own worth. Sarah had received 3 letters from Jason over the past year. The first had been angry and accusatory, blaming her for his financial problems and the end of his marriage. The second had been desperate and manipulative, asking for money to help him get back on his feet. The third had been different, quieter, more reflective, and genuinely remorseful. "Mom, I've been in therapy for 6 months," Jason had written. "I'm starting to understand how my actions hurt you, and I'm learning to take responsibility for my choices. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm trying to become the man you raised me to be." Sarah had read the letter carefully, and while she felt a flicker of hope for Jason's future, she had not responded. Some relationships were too damaged to repair, and some boundaries were too important to cross. The Sarah Thompson Foundation had become her primary focus, providing legal assistance and financial education to elderly individuals facing exploitation by family members. Sarah had helped dozens of people protect themselves from predatory relatives, and each success felt like a small victory against the forces that had once threatened to destroy her. This morning, Sarah was expecting a visit from Dorothy Walsh, who had become both a close friend and a fellow advocate. Dorothy had used her own experience to help other elderly women recognize the signs of financial abuse, and together they had created a network of support that spanned across Connecticut. "Sarah, you saved my life," Dorothy had said during one of their recent conversations. "If you hadn't shown me that I could fight back, I would have lost everything." Sarah smiled as she remembered Dorothy's words. She had learned that the most important person you can save is yourself, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the courage to protect their own dignity. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted her thoughts. Dorothy had arrived early, bringing with her another woman who needed help, a 68-year-old retired teacher whose son had been pressuring her to sell her house and move in with his family. Sarah walked to the door, feeling the familiar sense of purpose that had replaced the emptiness she had once felt. She had learned that family was not about blood relations, but about the people who chose to support and value you. She had discovered that it was never too late to start over, and that sometimes the greatest victory was simply refusing to be a victim. The baseball trophy caught the light as Sarah passed the kitchen window, and she smiled, remembering the 8-year-old boy who had once been her whole world. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who had made choices that Sarah couldn't accept. But the love she had felt for that boy had taught her about the capacity of the human heart, and the strength she had found in protecting herself had taught her about the power of the human spirit. Sarah Thompson had started her story as a generous mother, being exploited by her own son. She was ending it as an independent woman who had learned that the most important relationship you can have is the one with yourself, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to say goodbye.